In 1815 London, one haughty duke publicly humiliated Lady Elizabeth, declaring her unworthy of his name, never suspecting she would soon captivate the brilliant Italian diplomat who valued her mind above her status. When scandal and passion collide among the aristocracy, will Elizabeth choose the safe path of redemption or risk everything for a love that sees her true worth? The ballroom of Blackwood Hall gleamed under the light of 100 candles. Lady Elizabeth Harrington stood near the tall windows, her blue dress neat and smooth. She could smell sweet flowers and hear the soft music of violins. All around her, rich people talked and laughed. They wore fine clothes and shiny jewels. Elizabeth's heart beat fast. Tonight was important. The Duke of Westmoreland was going to ask her to marry him. She had waited for this day since she was a little girl. Her mother and father had told her that being a duchess was the best future for a lady like her. "You look perfect," her mother whispered, fixing a small curl of Elizabeth's hair. "Remember to smile and speak softly. The Duke likes quiet, well-behaved ladies." Elizabeth nodded. She knew the rules. Ladies must be pretty and sweet. They must not talk too much or show they are smart. These were the ways to win a good husband. The music stopped. The room got quiet. The Duke walked toward Elizabeth. He was tall, with dark hair and cold eyes. Everyone watched them. "Lady Elizabeth," said the Duke in a loud voice, "I have thought about making you my wife." Elizabeth smiled and waited for him to ask her to marry him. Her cheeks felt warm. "But I have decided you are not good enough for me," the Duke said. His voice was like ice. "You are unworthy of my name. Your family is not old enough or rich enough to join with mine." The room filled with soft gasps. Elizabeth felt like someone had thrown cold water on her face. Her smile froze. She could feel everyone staring at her. "I see," she said, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "Thank you for telling me, Your Grace." She wanted to run away and cry. She wanted to shout at the Duke. But she stood still, her back straight, her face calm. "Good evening, Your Grace," she said. Then she walked slowly across the room and out the door. In her room, Elizabeth let her tears fall. All her dreams were broken. She would not be a duchess. People would talk about her shame for months. No good man would want to marry her now. The next morning, Elizabeth packed her bags. "I will go to Aunt Margaret's house by the sea," she told her worried parents. "That odd woman?" her mother asked. "She lives alone and writes books about plants and stars. It's not proper." "I don't care about proper anymore," Elizabeth said. As her carriage rolled away from London, Elizabeth looked back at the city where she had tried so hard to be perfect. She felt sad, but also something new, like a small bird trying its wings for the first time. At Aunt Margaret's house, far from cruel whispers and strict rules, Elizabeth might find a different kind of life, maybe even a better one. Aunt Margaret's small stone house sat on a cliff above the sea. The waves crashed on the rocks below, making a sound like thunder. Elizabeth woke each morning to the cry of seagulls and the smell of salt air. It was so different from London's noise and smoke. "Come see what I found," Aunt Margaret called one morning. She stood in the garden, her grey hair wild in the wind. In her hands was a strange shell, twisted like a tiny staircase. Elizabeth took the shell and looked at it closely. "It's beautiful," she said. "The sea is full of wonders," said Aunt Margaret. "So is the sky. So are books." She pointed to her small room filled with books from floor to ceiling. "There's more to learn than how to pour tea and smile at rich men." Day by day, Elizabeth read Aunt Margaret's books. She learned about stars and plants, about faraway lands and new ideas. When she felt sad about the Duke, she walked on the beach and collected shells. The pain slowly got smaller. 3 months passed. Then one day, Aunt Margaret said, "I'm having friends for dinner. Smart people who like to talk about ideas. You should join us." Elizabeth was scared. She hadn't seen new people since the Duke had shamed her. But she said yes. That night, 5 people sat around Aunt Margaret's table. They talked about things Elizabeth had never heard at London parties: new machines, old stars, strange plants. One man spoke with a different sound in his words. "This is Lord Alessandro Ricci," said Aunt Margaret. "He comes from Italy to study our English plants." Alessandro had kind eyes and a warm smile. He didn't look at Elizabeth like she was just a pretty dress. He asked what she thought about the book she had read. At first Elizabeth spoke softly, afraid to seem too smart. but Alessandro listened to her words like they mattered. "You have read more books than most men I know," he said with a smile. The next week, Alessandro came again. He brought a strange flower for Aunt Margaret and a book for Elizabeth. They walked on the beach and talked about the sea creatures in the tide pools. "In Italy," he said, "women can study at some schools. They write books and paint pictures. One woman even teaches stars at a big school." Elizabeth felt something warm grow inside her heart. Not the quick, scared feeling she had with the Duke. This was calm and strong like the sea. Summer turned to fall. The leaves changed to red and gold. Elizabeth and Alessandro met often at Aunt Margaret's house. They looked at stars through a special tube called a telescope. They wrote down what plants grew near the sea. Sometimes their hands touched by accident. Sometimes Elizabeth thought Alessandro looked at her in a special way. She began to care less about what London people said about her. Here, with the sea and stars and Alessandro, she felt like her true self was waking up after a long sleep. Winter came and went. Spring brought new flowers and green leaves. Elizabeth had been at Aunt Margaret's house for almost a year. She no longer felt sad when she thought of London. One sunny morning a letter came. "The Royal Society is showing new finds from around the world," Aunt Margaret read. "My friend says we must come. Your work on sea plants is good enough to show there." Elizabeth felt scared and happy at the same time. "But London is where the Duke shamed me. What if people laugh at me?" "Let them laugh," said Aunt Margaret. "You're not the same girl who left London. You're stronger now." A week later, Elizabeth stood in the big hall of the Royal Society. People looked at tables full of strange rocks, plants, and animals. Elizabeth wore a simple green dress, not the fancy clothes she used to wear. Her sea plant drawings sat on a table with her name on them. "These are very good," said a man with grey hair. "You have a good eye for tiny things most people miss." Elizabeth smiled and stood taller. No one here cared that the Duke had said she wasn't good enough. They cared about her work, her mind. Then she saw him. The Duke of Westmoreland walked through the hall looking bored. When he saw Elizabeth, his eyes got big with surprise. "Lady Elizabeth," he said, walking to her. "What a nice surprise. I heard you left London." "I did," said Elizabeth. Her voice was calm and strong. "I've been studying sea life with my aunt." The Duke looked at her drawings. "Very nice," he said, but he didn't really look at them. "You know, I've been thinking about what I said last year. It was too harsh. Your family's good enough after all. Maybe we could talk about marriage again." Elizabeth felt a strange feeling. A year ago, these words would have made her so happy. Now, they felt empty. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said, "but I'm afraid that's not possible now." The Duke's face got red. "Why not? Have you found someone else? Someone better than a Duke?" "Yes," said Elizabeth. "I found myself." Just then, Alessandro walked up. "Elizabeth, there you are. I want to show you the new star maps from France." The Duke looked at Alessandro with cold eyes. "Who is this?" "Lord Alessandro Ricci," said Elizabeth. "A friend and fellow student of nature." The Duke sniffed. "An Italian? Really, Elizabeth, you can do better." Alessandro smiled. "Lady Elizabeth does very well. Her work on sea plants is being printed in the Society's book next month." Later, as they walked in the garden outside, Alessandro took Elizabeth's hand. "I must go back to Italy soon," he said. "My family has a house with a room just for looking at stars. It needs someone with a good mind and careful eyes." Elizabeth's heart beat fast. "Are you asking me to go with you?" "Yes," said Alessandro. "Not as a wife who just pours tea and looks pretty. As a partner who thinks and works and shares ideas. Will you come?" Elizabeth looked back at the building where the Duke stood. Then she looked at Alessandro's kind face. She thought of the sea, the stars, the world of ideas she'd found. "Yes," she said, "I will come." The old olive tree spread its branches wide over the small group of people. The air smelled of sweet flowers and warm earth. Elizabeth stood next to Alessandro in a simple white dress with tiny blue flowers in her hair. No big church, no hundreds of guests, no fancy music like there would have been if she'd married the Duke. "I take you, Elizabeth, as my partner in life, in work, in all things," said Alessandro. His voice was warm like the Italian sun. "I take you, Alessandro, as my partner in thought, in heart, in all our days," said Elizabeth. Aunt Margaret wiped a tear from her eye. Alessandro's mother smiled and nodded. His sister put a crown of olive leaves on Elizabeth's head. "In our family," she said, "olive leaves mean peace and wisdom. You bring both to my brother." They shared sweet cake and juice from the grapes that grew on the hills. There were no gold plates or fancy foods like at London parties. But the love and joy were more real than anything Elizabeth had felt before. The next day, Alessandro took Elizabeth to their new home. It sat on a hill above the city of Florence. From the windows, Elizabeth could see red roofs, tall towers, and the wide river that ran through the middle of the city. "This will be your room for study," said Alessandro, opening a door. Inside was a big room with tall windows. Sunlight poured onto a wooden desk. Shelves waited for books. A table held maps of stars. In the corner stood a telescope bigger than the one at Aunt Margaret's house. "It's perfect," whispered Elizabeth. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Elizabeth learned to speak Italian. She and Alessandro watched the stars every clear night. They wrote down what they saw. Elizabeth drew pictures of new plants she found on the hills. One warm evening, 6 months after they came to Italy, Elizabeth stood on the balcony. The sun was setting, turning the sky pink and gold. She could hear the bells from the city's big church. The smell of dinner cooking came from the kitchen below. Alessandro came out and stood beside her. "A letter came today," he said, "from the Royal Society in London." Elizabeth took the letter with shaking hands. She read it twice to be sure. "They want to print my paper about how stars move," she said. "They say I'm the first woman to have a paper with just her name on it." Alessandro hugged her tight. "I'm so proud of you." Elizabeth looked out at the beautiful city below them. She thought about the scared girl she'd been in London trying so hard to please everyone. That girl seemed like someone from a story now, not her real self. "The Duke did me a favour," she said. "If he had asked me to marry him, I would have said yes. I would never have found this life, this work, this love." "He said you were unworthy of his name," said Alessandro. "He was right, but not in the way he meant. Your own name has become too important to trade for any title." Elizabeth smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. The first stars were coming out in the dark blue sky. Tomorrow there would be more to learn, more to see, more to write. And she would do it all as Elizabeth Harrington, the woman who found her true self when she stopped trying to be what others wanted.